What is up, guys? I'm your friendly neighborhood web war fanatic, and today I'll be going over the top 10 rules mistakes in Marvel Champions that makes the game a lot harder. A lot of these are just clarifications that new players aren't aware of, but when you know about them, your games become a lot easier. Each one of these points are things that will benefit the player, and when I learned about them, it definitely made my games a lot easier as well. Let's go ahead and jump down to the table and get into the video. Alright guys, we're here at the table, and the first rules mistake that a lot of beginners make their games a lot more difficult is not knowing what classifies as an attack. So let's say, for example, we're playing Peter Parker Spider-Man and we're facing Rhino right here, and Rhino has 4 hit points left, and we're also engaged with a minion called the Hydra Mercenary, which has guard. While this minion is engaged with you, you cannot attack the villain. So we cannot exhaust Peter Parker Spider-Man to use his attack stat, his basic attack activation, and attack Rhino to try to defeat him because we have the guard minion in place. So we have to defeat this minion first before we can attack Rhino. We also cannot play attack events like the swing web kick right here because it's a hero action attack, clarifying that it is an attack. So you do 8 damage to enemy, but since we're engaged with this minion, we cannot hit Rhino with the swing web kick. However, if you have like an ally like Nick Fury in your hand, you can play Nick Fury. He has a force response after Nick Fury enters play. Choose one. Remove 2 threat from a scheme, draw 3 cards, or deal 4 damage to enemy. So that means if we play Nick Fury here, that ability to do 4 damage to enemy is not attack damage, it's just damage. So we can do 4 damage ignoring this Garmin and hit round directly, and that'll bring from 4 down to 0 right there. In Marvel Champions, there are a lot of effects that revolve around attacking and attacks, and everything that is an attack, we either have like, that attack, stat or say attack, or have like the attack keyword right there, right? So as long as you're doing damage that is not an attack, you can bypass all those effects that says that you cannot attack or anything like that, like guard, for example. Okay, so we've changed the table a little bit up here to showcase the second rules mistake that a lot of people make that make their games a lot more difficult, and that is what classifies as a thwart. Let's say you're facing Rhino again here, and the main scheme is at 6 out of 7 threat. If it hits 7, then we do lose the game. This would mean that we need to exhaust Peter Parker Spider-Man to thwart for 1 to bring some threat off the main scheme. But if you're engaged with a minion like the Kree Commando from the Kree Militants module, this minion here has patrol. While this minion is engaged with you, you cannot thwart the main scheme. So we cannot exhaust Peter Parker Spider-Man to remove threat from the main scheme with this basic thwart activation. And we also cannot play thwart events that have that thwart keyword to remove threat from the break-in. But if you have a card like the Surveillance Team here, the 2-cost support from the core set, comes in here with 3 snoop counters. As an action, you can exhaust Surveillance Team and remove a snoop counter to remove 1 threat from the scheme. This is a support that you can play. So let's say you play this card here, and you put the 3 snoop counters on this card. 1, 2, 3. Well, this support does not have the thwart keyword, so it does not count as Peter Parker Spider-Man thwarting whenever you use this to remove threat. So if we exhaust Surveillance Team and remove a snoop counter from here, you can remove 1 threat from any scheme, choose the main scheme, and remove that threat from there, and now we are okay, and then the main scheme will not pop, and we will not lose this immediately next turn, right? So that's a great way to bypass a patrolman here. Otherwise, we have to defeat the patrolman and then still thwart to remove threat from the main scheme. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you have a side scheme in play with a crisis icon, for example, the crisis icon says while this scheme is in play, you cannot remove threat from the main scheme. So let's say this side scheme right here is in play and there's 2 threat on there. Well, even if you play the surveillance team right here, right, there's going to be the 3 snoop counters. We cannot exhaust it and remove a counter to remove a threat from the main scheme while the crisis is in play, right? Marvel Champions has very clear, words. So it says here, you cannot remove threat from the main while it's in play, while the patrol says you cannot thwart the main. So there are 2 different effects here, and we just have to read really carefully. And I often, make that mistake of not reading carefully. But this one, we can still remove threat from the main as long as it's not a thwart. But while this one is in play, no threat can be removed at all from the main scheme. And that is rules mistake number 2. Alright guys, we are switching heroes here to showcase rules mistake number 3 that a lot of beginners make, and that is that responses trigger before an ally will take consequential damage. So in order to showcase that, I'm going to use a Peter Parker Spider-Man basic ally right here. Let's say you're playing with the Silk Hero and you're playing against Round right here. You're engaged with this minion called the Hydra Bomber, and you are already exhausted for whatever reason. And you have the Peter Parker Spider-Man ally. He has 2 damage already on him, which means he only has 1 hit point left because he has 3 hit points to begin with. And he has 2 thwart to attack. He has a response. After Spider-Man attacks or thwarts, you choose another web warrior character, then ready that character. Silk is another web warrior character, and we want to ready her. So let's say, for example, Spider-Man Peter Parker exhausts and he attacks for 2 on the Hydra Bomber. Dealing 2 damage will defeat the Hydra Bomber. Then, I've seen a lot of players, after doing that, give Peter Parker a Spider-Man consequential damage, giving him his 3rd damage here, and he will get defeated and then go away, right? However, the way that the rules and the timing sequence works in Marvel Champions is that after an ally thwarts or attacks, they can actually trigger their response here first. So it says here, after he attacks or thwarts, choose another web war character, write that character. So he just attacked, right? He can now trigger that response, write up another web warrior in Silk here, and then after Silk readies, Spider-Man Peter Parker will take 1 consequential damage. So he has a total of 3 damage for his 3 hit points, and then now he will go to discard pile, getting defeated. But we have Silk up here readied up. So now she can exhaust the Thor or attack with her basic activation. Let's also run this scenario back a little bit with Taiga right here. So let's say we have a similar situation, and then we have Taiga right here also with 2 consequential damage already for her regular hit point stat of 3. Now for the Tiger ally from the core set, her response is after she attacks and defeats a minion, heal 1 damage from Tiger. That means that if you swing for her, for 2, and she defeats the Hydra Bomber, before Tiger takes constant damage, she can trigger that response, heal a damage here, and then after she heals, she will take a constant damage. So a lot of times, her ability is very good. In another example, if we run this back again, and let's say Tiger has no damage on her, so she's at her full hit points of 3, and let's say that she exhausts to attack the Hydra Bomber, defeats his minion. Well, remember, response is triggered before consequential damage. So after Tiger attacks and defeats a minion, he 1 damage from her. She's at full life. She will heal damage, but she can't heal anything, so she just stays at full life. Then after that response, she would then take 1 consequential damage, and she would end here with 1 damage on her. So sometimes it can be good, sometimes it can be bad. Usually and most of the time, having the response be triggered before taking consequential damage is a good thing for the players. So remember, the ally can use their ability 1 more time before they get taken out with constant damage if they have that 1 hit point left. And that is the 3rd rules mistake that a lot of new players make. The 4th rules mistake that a lot of new players make that makes their games a lot more difficult is not knowing that interrupts and responses are optional unless they are forced. So for example here, let's say we're playing the Star-Lord hero and you have the Gamora ally in play. She has a hero response, it's not a forced response. So after Gamora attacks or thwarts, so basically whenever she uses the basic activation, you discard cards on top of your deck until you discard an event, then add that card to your hand. So sometimes, most of the times, this can be a really good effect to get an extra card to your hand. But sometimes maybe you don't want to mill your deck because you're looking for like a key upgrade or support, and you don't want to lose cards from it, right? So even though it says after Gamora attacks or thwarts, you do this thing, you don't actually have to trigger that response because it is optional, right? So after, let's say she thwarts for 1 here from the main, you do not have to trigger that hero response, and then she will take a constant damage, and then she's done with her thing, right? An example of a forced response is someone like Nick Fury here, who has a forced response after Nick Fury enters play, choose one. So whenever Nick Fury enters play, you have to do one of these abilities no matter what, even if you don't want to. But for Nick, most of the times, it's going to be advantageous to do one of those abilities. But yeah, you do have to do this. And the reason why it's forced is because at the end of the round, if Nick Fury is still in play, you have to discard all as a part of this forced response right here. But for most allies, having that option of whether you want to trigger that response or not, tied into either playing them or having them activate, is very advantageous for your player. And yeah, that is another rules mistake that a lot of new players make. All right, guys, for the 5th rules mistake, we are hopping back here to Peter Parker Spider-Man, and that definitely feels a lot better here. So the 5th rules mistake is that if a card is not reviewed, the one-reviewed effects do not trigger, and also Surge and Insight also do not trigger. So let's say, for example, you have some sort of ability that says to put this minion into play engage with you. Well, Hydra Bomber has a 1-reviewed effect here says to choose to either take 2 damage or place 1 threat on the main scheme. But if this minion is put into play engage with you, it is not reviewed, so that means that 1-reviewed effect will not trigger, so you can ignore that. Squared off is an example of how a minion can be put in play engage with you. It says here action, discard cards from the encounter deck until you discard a minion. So let's say we get the Hydra Bomber that way, then you put that minion into play engage with you, and then you play an ally from hand, reducing its cost by 3. So if Hydra Bomber enters play that way, you do not trigger that 1-review ability. But if you review the Hydra Bomber with an effect, or if you just reveal it as a part of the final step of that encounter phase, then you do have to trigger the 1-review effect and choose either take 2 damage or place 1 threat on the main scheme. Cards that have the Surge or Insight keyword also do not trigger whenever they are put into play, only whenever they are reviewed. An exception is the Quickstrike keyword right here. So if the Vulture minion engages the hero, it attacks. That is different because if this minion is reviewed or whenever it's put into play, it's still going to be engaged with your hero. So Quickstrike will trigger if you get the vulture minion, for example, through the effect of squared off. But oftentimes, if you're in a really close game, triggering that one reviewed effect to either take 2 damage or place 1 threat on the main scheme could be game ending. So knowing that whenever you get this minion here, if it is, not reviewed, you don't have to trigger that, can be very helpful to not lose a game in Marvel Champions. And that is the 5th rules mistake that a lot of new players make. And speaking of the vulture minion, let's move on to the 6th rules mistake that a lot of new players miss, and that is that the quick strike keyword does not trigger if this minion is engaging your alter ego, right? Because it says here, after this minion engages your hero, it attacks. If the vulture is reviewed here against Peter Parker in his alter ego, then the vulture will not trigger the quick strike because there's no hero that it's engaging with and it will not attack. If you get the vulture and you're in hero form, it doesn't matter if you put it into play or if it is reviewed, it is still going to attack your hero. So if you know that you're going to get a quick strike minion, it's really good to be down here in alter ego. And a lot of new players don't know that, and whenever they engage a vulture, they'll take the 3 damage, and that could cause the player to lose the game if your hit points are already low. I did not know about this rule for a long time after I first started playing Marvel Champions, but this really taught me to read carefully because it says engage your hero right there for what the quick strike effect does. The 7th rule mistake that a lot of new players make is how to deal with your obligation here. So let's say you're playing Peter Parker Spider-Man and you get this obligation eviction notice. So it says give to the Peter Parker player. Obligations right here will stay in play unless you get rid of them. For this effect here, you trigger this right away. It says you may flip to alter ego form, then choose one. You can either exhaust Peter Parker to remove this card from the game, or discard one card at random from your hand. This card gains surge, and then discard this obligation. So if you get the eviction notice, it doesn't matter which effect that you choose, right? You can always do the first one where you may flip to alter ego form. So right when we get this card, you can decide, hey, do I want to flip down to alter ego right now, even if I cannot exhaust Peter Parker and I don't want to exhaust Peter Parker? Because flipping down to alter ego may be very beneficial to you to be able to use your alter ego ability, like scientist right here, and also if you have your Aunt May already down in play. So 1 cost support as an alter ego action exhausted to heal 4 damage from Peter Parker. So a lot of heroes will have these powerful alter ego cards and alter ego actions. So even if you don't want to trigger that first ability where you must exhaust Peter Parker, that's in his alter ego to remove this card from the game, you can still flip down to alter ego if, let's say, you're already exhausted. Then choose a second option to discard 1 card at random from hand, and this card will gain surge, and you discard the obligation. So a lot of new players don't know that you can actually pick that effect and flip down to alter ego, get a free flip essentially, right? And then do whatever effects that you want to do with the obligation. And then whenever your player turn begins, you can do whatever you want to do. Exhaust animated Hue 4 from Peter Parker, brings them all the way back up to full life, and then you can use your 1 flip per turn to flip over to hero form. It's important to note a lot of the newer obligations from the X-Men will work a little bit differently, but it's important to read carefully. If you have an obligation that says you may flip to alter ego form, you can always flip to alter ego form and get a huge advantage if you want. For the 8th rules mistake, we're switching villains here. So right now we have Ultron here on his stage 2. And let's say we're also playing Peter Parker Spider-Man because you guys know I love playing Peter Parker Spider-Man. So the force interrupt here for Ultron says that whenever he attacks you, you put the top card of your deck into play face down engaged with you as a drone minion. Until the end of the attack, he gets +1 attack for each drone minion engaged with you. However, let's say you give a card like Webbed Up here and you attach this to Ultron. This is a 4-cost upgrade. Here from only you can attach enemy max 1 per enemy. It says force interrupt. When an attached enemy would attack, you discard Webbed Up instead and you stun the enemy. So let's say this is on Ultron here, and Ultron is about to attack Peter Parker Spider-Man. Well, Webbed Up says when an attached enemy would attack, Force Interrupt says when Ultron attacks you, he's not going to attack you because when he would attack, we discard this instead, and we give a stun status card here on Ultron. So now we can ignore that Force Interrupt, we don't have to trigger it, and then we do not get a drone minion. Also, with Spire Sense here, it says interrupt when a villain initiates an attack against you, draw a card. Ultron did not initiate that attack because of our webbed effect there, stopping that as well. So also we will not be able to trigger our Spire Sense, but we also didn't have to trigger Ultron's, Force Interrupt to get that drone minion. Status cards here work the exact same way as a webbed up would. It says here the next time this character would attack, you discard the status card instead. So let's say we give Ultron the stun because of that webbed up, and then the next turn he attacks again. Force interrupt when Ultron attacks you, you do that effect, but he's stunned. So whenever he would attack, we just discard the stun stats instead, and we can bypass and ignore that force interrupt again for a second activation in a row. A lot of villains will have an effect that will trigger if they scheme or attack or if they activate. So if you have them stunned or confused, then you can ignore that effect by canceling that activation. The 9th rules mistake that a lot of new players make is how the hazard icon works in Marvel Champions. hazards only happen if they're in play before the step where we're dealing counter cards happen. So let's say, for example, you're in a step where you're dealing counter cards and Ultron deals Spider-Man a face 9 counter card. Then you review in counter cards. So let's say we review the side skin right here, which is Ultron's Imperative. It has a hazard icon. So you will do this one reviewed effect, you put it into play, and then you will, have 2 threat on it right here, right? But there's a hazard icon, which means you get extra encounter card only whenever you are dealing encounter cards. We have already done encounter cards. We're currently in the step of revealing encounter cards, so we do not have to deal that extra encounter card. However, let's say, for example, you're in the player phase right here, and Ultron only has 2 hit points left on his stage 2. You exhaust Peter Parker's Spider-Man to attack Ultron, bring him down to 0 life here, and then he flips over to his stage 3. And then on stage 3, Ultron has a 1-bit effect, searching and countering discard power for Ultron's Imperative, which is that setting that we just saw, and then we reveal it. So let's say we reveal it right here, come into 2 threat, we do that effect there, so we get 2 drone minions, and then we end our turn. So we ready back up, and now during Ultron's turn, he's gonna have that 27 life on his stage 3, but he'll go through his activations, do all his stuff, and then he'll also add threat, to the main scheme. But then when he deals encounter cards, we're going to search for that hazard icon, and it is in play. So we will be getting 2 face down encounter cards here. And then after we do that step, we're going to do next step where we review all of our encounter cards, which are 2, because the hazard icon was already in play. But a lot of times, if the hazard icon, gets it in play, through the step where you're revealing encounter cards, you do not have to get an extra encounter card from the hazard icon. It's also important to note that the hazard icon is only +1 encounter card per hazard icon that you see, not per player. So if you're playing 2 players, you don't get 2 extra encounter cards in every single turn. If there's 1 hazard icon in play, only 1. And the 10th and final rules mistake that a lot of people aren't aware of only pertains to multiplayer, and that is that actions can be triggered during another player's turn, even if your turn has already ended or if it hasn't begun yet. For example, if you have a helicarrier on the table and it's your friend's turn and they need help paying for their cards, you can exhaust the helicarrier out of turn and reduce the next cost that your friend plays by 1. If your friend is stuck with a guard minion, you can even play an event like Haymaker out of turn to defeat that minion. Keep in mind that allies, supports, and upgrades must be played during your turn, but if they're already in play and they have an action on them, you can trigger it out of turn. And there you have it, guys. These are 10 rules mistakes that a lot of players don't know about that will make your Marvel Champions games that much easier. Let me know down in the comments if you didn't know about any of these rules and if there are any other rules mistakes that you made when you first started playing. I hope you guys enjoyed this one and I'll see you guys all in the next video.